Erev Tov, everyone. The Torah informs us that the Luchot that Moshe brought down on Sinai had Aseret HaDvarim, 10, we call it the 10 Commandments, 10 instructions, 10 ideas. But there is not a unanimity amongst the Meforshim, which are the 10. The controversy mainly centers on what we consider to be the first commandment. Anochi Hashem Elokecha, Asher Hotzeisicha Meretz Mitzrayim Mibeis Avodim. What kind of a commandment is that? It's a statement. Anochi Kaviochel, I am Hashem Elokecha, the Lord your God, that engineered your exodus from Egypt, from the house of bondage. So is that one of the commandments or not? Or is it only a preface, a preamble, a statement? In other words, it's said because, so to speak, you owe me. I took you out. Because I took you out, now I'm going to tell you what to do, what the mission is, what the purpose is. It was not just simply that you should no longer be in Egypt, but that the mission is far greater, far into the future, eternal mission. Skula mikol ha'amim, mamlechas kohanim, goy kadosh. So therefore, the preamble is Anochi Hashem Elokecha. But that's not a commandment. Now, this is the Shita of Rabbeinu Sadia Gaon and other great authorities. It has never been adopted really as being the accepted way that we look at the Aseret HaDvarim. My opinion is, and you all know that I'm never wrong, but my opinion is that because the Christian world adopted the opinion of Rabbeinu Sadia, according to the church, Anochi is not one of the 10 commandments. Since the non-Jewish world adopted that opinion, so that, so to speak, disqualified it in the eyes of most of the scholars, and that Anochi became the first of the commandments. Even though there's no Lashon Tzivui there, no language of commandment, and it's also very nebulous. What does it say? Now, if you say that Anochi is not one of the 10 commandments, then how do you get to 10? So there are 3 psukim that follow Anochi. Lo yeh lecha Elohim acherim al ponoi. You should not have other gods. In other words, you can believe that Anochi Hashem Elokecha Asher Hotzeisicha Meretz Mitzrayim, yes, But there are other forces in the world as well. There are other ideas. And that really is the basis of paganism. Is that the basis of paganism is that there are many forces, many gods. They call them gods, but it represented all of the different forces that exist, some in nature, some in interhuman relationships, some within human beings themselves, all of the pieces that make up our universe. Each one has a power to itself. So the lo yeh lecho Elohim acherim al ponoi is the basis for monotheism. That there's only one. And the one is indefinable. It's beyond our comprehension. But what is within our comprehension is that there is nothing else. There's no one else there, which has been the basis, one of the bases for the argument between the Jewish world and the non-Jewish world, the Western world, the Christian world, because the shreds of paganism that still exist go against this commandment of lo yeh lecha. Then it says lo sishtachav elahem v'lo so'ovdei. You shouldn't worship them. So that's two separate lavin. One lav is not to have one. And the second one is not to worship it. So this is a major question, again, discussed by all of the great thinkers in the Jewish world. The Rambam talks about it. Rabbi Sadja talks about it. Rabbi Levi talks about it. Down to our time. How do we define that? People have within themselves the ability and the weakness to create gods. You have an idea that overrides everything else. We see that in politics, for instance, people who are confirmed on one end of the spectrum and who are confirmed on the other end of the spectrum. So to them, it's a god. You do no wrong. And because to them, it's a god, if you don't agree with them, then you're a heretic. It's not just that you disagree. People don't understand the depth of emotion that is involved in these matters. Because if you have a different opinion, that means that I'm wrong. And I'm never wrong. So by your saying that I'm wrong, it automatically creates an enmity. But then there's a third pasuk here that deals not only not to have and not to worship, but not to fashion or create. And that's a shaila in halacha, long time shaila in halacha. For instance, it's well known that the souvenir sellers at the Vatican were always traditionally Jewish. And that was because they were the Pope's Jews. They were protected by the Pope. And their parnosa was to sell souvenirs to those that visit the Vatican. So are you halachically allowed to do that? Not only that, are you halachically allowed to create it, to fashion it? You know, the terrible joke, that the guy calls up, the Jew calls up the supplier and he says he needs He needs crucifixes to sell, and the guy says to him, "Mit Yezel or under Yezel." So that's what's involved there. But then the shaila arises even in a broader sense. I had a friend of mine in Muncie. I didn't have many, but I had a friend. And he was a great artist, craftsman. His main business was picture frames, but not, 100 shekel picture frame. He once showed me a picture frame that he charged $250,000 for. The man bought a $12 million Rembrandt, so you don't go to Woolworths to buy a picture frame. And he was a very, very interesting Jew. German Jew, fine Jew. So he once came to me and he said, "I have a great quandary here," because there was a building in Midtown Manhattan that was purchased by Citibank. That building originally was a church. So the church agreed to sell the building because Citibank was going to build this 75-story skyscraper, etc. But they wanted that Citibank should build a small chapel on the bottom so that they could continue their services there. And Citibank agreed. And so they began to build a chapel. So they came to this man and they said to him, they want the altar to be gilded in gold. And he was an expert at that, in gilding, the thinnest of gold, not paint, but real gold. And they offered him a sizable commission. They would buy the gold and he would fashion it. So he came to me and he asked me what he should do. So I told him that when it comes to gold, that's out of my league. It's too big a shaila. I would not take it upon myself. But I told him that he should ask Rabbi Schwab in Washington Heights, who was the Rav in the German shul, ask him the shaila. And he asked him, and Rabbi Schwab didn't give him a definitive answer, but he gave a personal indication that if it were Rabbi Schwab, he wouldn't do it, because he felt it impinged on these lavin which appear in the Aseret Advarim. So he refused the commission, even though it meant a lot of money, because of the fact that he did not have a rabbinic heter for it. So we see that this concept extends far beyond what we thought were its original confines. And then the main question here in the shaila was Ava. You're engendering hate. The non-Jews will say, look at this. You're supposed to live in a tolerant country. You're not willing to work. We're not asking you to worship it. So we had a whole, you had to construct an entire method of how to avoid refusing the commission. But in the end, he refused it and he didn't do it. So you see, depending on how we look at all of these things, the Aseret HaDvarim are all inclusive, even though we're not able to define exactly which are the Aseret HaDvarim. And the Ramban in this week's Parsha says that the Aseret HaDvarim include all Taryag mitzvahs. All 613 mitzvahs can be assigned to one of the Dvarim. So like all of Hilchos Nezikin can go to Lo Signov, and Even Ezer can go to Lo Sinov, and Sanhedrin can go to Lo Saneh Bereach Shoker, and Moedim can go to Zochar Yom HaShabbos Lakadsho, etc. So when we hear the Aseret HaDvarim read this Shabbos, we should realize that's the whole Torah. It will expand. There are many subsections. There are many new questions. There are many old questions. But it's Kol HaTorah Kula. And that is what was included with what Moshe brought down from Sinai. And that's what makes us Zgula Mikol Ha'amim, Mamlechas Kohanim, the Goy Kadosh. Rabbi Chananya ben Akasha, Meretz HaKadosh Baruch Hu, L'Zakos Yisrael, V'fichal Chirba Lahem Torah, Mitzvos, Shem Adonai Chavetz Man Tzidko, Yagdil Torah V'Yadir. I don't know what happened here.
Yeah, kicked out?
Huh?
No, still there.
No.
People heard it.